Hi, this is Priority Station, and this is day 556 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Arestovich, and also in a new format with Nikolai Feldman and Yuri Romanenko. Today, they talk about Russian failures to counterattack on three directions of the current front, Russian troops noticed fleeing near Robotino, United Nations trying to revive the grain deal, and Russia was the only country who did not object to China's new map showing Far East as a part of China. Apologies for some sound quality issues, we are still traveling, and with this, let's deep dive into day 556. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. Today we are in field conditions, basically, conducting a usual day of this military diary. Alexei is also streaming live, and he's also remote as well. And Yuri Romanenko, I think, is also casting live, and he is also not in the studio. Greetings, everybody. Yeah, extra curricular gathering. Let's consider this one to be open and started. So today, it's Saturday. Russian troops were conducting active actions, active attacks on three directions of the front. There were over 15 engagements. Alexei, what do we know about that? Well, we know that these are usual directions where they continue their push. Liman, Svatova, they are failing, but they're still trying. Their command has a certain ideation that they need to get to Baravaya over here by the river and the water reservoir that's a little bit to the west on the map you can see. And to get some political result, which they would be able to call as liberation, in quotes, of Lugansk territory. I would remind once again that Lugansk region was under them, 100% of that was under them during this war at some point, and then we successfully pushed them further out. Now, this attempt is to try to drag our troops from the southern part of the front to the northeastern, and in reality, this ideation completely failed because right now they are dragging and pulling these troops from this front line down to the south. So we do know about that, that's confirmed. Yes, 76th Paratroopers Division was thrown near Robotino, and according to some information, all 100% of the division is there, all three detachments. And according to what we know, our troops are fortifying their current positions, current successes, and expanding it a bit. This is good because we are apparently preparing for Russian counterattacks on this part of the front, which is, again, likely good for us because they will waste a bunch of their troops. And by the way, what we have noticed there is that now there is systemic fleeing, systemic running away from the front. We see single soldiers, we see the whole groups leaving their positions. Whenever we engage next portion of the front, whenever we become effective and active there, they start fleeing. They specifically complain about cluster munitions, which cause a lot of damage, not to their physical positions, but also to their morale. And we estimate that our troops will use this little pause to get more detachments to that segment, and we'll continue. And you can see on the map, see that second line. Our Ukrainian name calls it Ocherovate. You can see that fortified region. And that's the general direction of where we're going, but we also remember that our command knows how to shift attacks between different parts of the front line. The rest of the front didn't change much. Our troops are also advancing near Bakhmut, and there is also a piece of the front near Kupiansk and Kremenaya where we are actively attacking. They continue showing us trying to attack us in Mariinka and Avdiivka. That's been going on for 18 months without any success on their side. And the usual parts of the front where we already have seen them fighting day in, day out. This, of course, are not easy fights, they're difficult fights, but there was no significant changes of the front line on both sides. We are fortifying and expanding our front line and fine-tuning it to match our tactical needs, and they have failed to push us back anywhere. Same situation on the left side of Kherson. We continue harassing their positions, and they, according to their own statements, are failing to cull our efforts there of special services operations, and they're also complaining about Ukrainian artillery. That is very precise. There were some hits on the south of Ukraine by Russia, Kryvyi Rog and a couple other towns. They hit with missiles. Unfortunately, that becomes routine. Do you hear me? Do you hear me well? I want to add something here. Yes, we do, Yuri. I want to add here that near Odessa, I just got a note that Mohajer 6 UAV was shot down, which is rather interesting. This Iranian-made UAV is of a different class. It's closer to Bayraktar. It can carry more payload. It was used against Ukraine before. We even shot one of them at the end of last year. It even was carrying a missile, Can-5, back then. Mohajer are also used to aid Shaheds in targeting. So I'm not sure if it is used as the cell tower, as basically relay for them, or indeed as a coordinator of their attacks. So the question posed is, are we getting new supplies, new military UAVs? Is Russia getting them from Iran? Is that the reality on this front? And it also has a certain type of engines made in Iran, and are these dual-use goods if the UAV is assembled in Russia? So the question, I guess, would it be a new reality where they use systemically, or is it just an individual situation? And we can see that Russians are changing their tactics now. They are sending missiles that can maneuver, that can use unusual trajectories. Their cruise missiles are using the lowlands. They fly along the river to hide from our air defense systems. So now we also have Mohajers. Do you think we also will have them in notable quantities? Let's put it this way. One needs to understand that war, of course, always fosters new ways and new means of fighting, because both sides are trying to deceive each other and try to figure ways to break through. And I would say that it also can be taken as, I wouldn't say, people will probably take it wrong and say that Russia is out of missiles. They're not out of missiles, but they want to use them more precisely. And they would rather use different tools to aid in these goals. Plus, they're also trying to store some to hit on our infrastructure in winter, I suppose. I don't know if Mohajers will be used en masse. There were some news that Russia was getting some of these drones, and definitely they will be used, and they are being used as not only carriers of explosives. They can be sent individually, but they're also being used as essentially relays for Shaheds. For now, it's individual single-use cases. I guess it's curious to observe what happens in the future. And what's interesting here is that Iran still continues to deny that they're not supplying anything to Russia. and actually posting protest notes that they are not sending any goods to Russian Federation. Stop attacking Iran, we're not providing Russia any military goods. And here we observe a next generation of UAVs, Iran made, which are better than Shahed. Shahed is a very primitive device. This one is definitely more advanced. We hope that this will not be used en masse. This will be more like individual use, attempts to try new kinds of weapons in the areas of high intensity fighting or wherever they can see some valuable targets. And we can say that according to the last data, Iran had over 200 of those in their troops, in their army, perhaps more now. But another, by the way, element to that. In Iran, they saw Yak 130 from Russian Federation. So that can be a sign that these two are indeed dealing with each other, and they're supplying certain military articles to Iran as well, which cannot not worry Arab countries of the Persian Gulf. Not so much United States and Britain, but Iranian neighbors and those countries that Iran is aggressive against. And what else have Russians given to Iran for their support? That's another concern. Okay, let's go talk about another piece of news from United Nations, where apparently they prepared, with participation of Turkey, additional material for grain deal, and they're talking about alleviation some of the sanctions from Russia and allowing a daughter company of Russian Agricultural Bank to the international payment system SWIFT, and deblocking their sales of nitrogen fertilizers in Europe. How that can be taken, Alexei? Well, grain deal is a deal that is aimed at not only helping Ukraine and our partners, but different countries in the world. Because the grain prices, they were fluctuating quite a bit after Russia said that they are quitting this deal, quitting this agreement. So they are trying to resolve three tasks: to stop us from providing grain to the market, to try to sell theirs higher, and also try to play on the seasonality of the market with different droughts in other countries that are supplying grain. And of course, as a background, they try to push for alleviation of some of the sanctions against Russia, enabling some of the agriculture banks to do world trade and to sell more fertilizers. They are not exactly linked to grain deal, but they're definitely being used by Russia as additional elements to that. And Russia was always playing the map since the beginning, the card since the beginning of this deal, that they were cheated, that NATO promised that Russia will be able to sell fertilizers. So they're trying to wiggle that into the agreement. Russia does want to prevail over Ukraine in the agriculture market. We are competitors there for sure. And they're following a very hard line. Remember, they were attacking our agriculture infrastructure. They were destroying our grain facilities, grain storage facilities in the port of Odessa and others. So if United Nations will, if the world will actually agree with that suggestion, it, in my opinion, will be a big mistake, because that will be agreeing with Russia and following with their attacks and basically confirming that it's okay to attack the agricultural facilities of your competitor. So, in my opinion, Turkey should be playing harder in favor of Ukraine, to make sure the world gets more of our goods and doesn't fold to Russian demands. So, do you think Russian agriculture products are unacceptable on the world markets? Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. Russian products should not be on the international markets. If there are shortages, Ukraine can cover most of those. I will add here that, as far as I know, Turks are rather sure that grain supplies from Ukraine will continue coming and that they will figure a way to push that deal in the new format. Well, this is not the first attempt. They used to talk with a representative of Tatarstan because Russian high representatives didn't go. They were talking through a third intermediaries. And Turkey actually does have interesting angles because they also have their interest in Nagorno-Karabakh, in the Armenia-Azerbaijan area of conflict. And it also brings them political prestige of the country that managed to provide additional aid with basically bread to their friends and people of the same faith in the Northern Africa. So it's prestige, it's earning money, it's general doing good to different countries. So Turkey will be pushing from different angles. The question remains how much would we have to sacrifice for that deal to work, and if Russia will get a bit too much as a result of it. Okay, let's go further. Ukrainian news are full with the last name Kolomoisky, one of our oligarchs, and he was arrested and put in jail. And he is in jail until he comes with a bail, 510 million hryvnias, which is a big amount, but probably not for him. So, what do you think? What is that? Is that fighting with corruption? Is that internal Ukrainian issue? I think it's not just Ukrainian process. I think this is a process implemented jointly by us and our allies from the West, because the West had a lot of questions to Kolomoisky and his structures, and is pressing our current president and his administration to reactivate on the front of corruption. An announcement of new wave of fighting with corruption and giving more opportunities for Ukrainian security services to fight that. So we can only wish that this anti-corruption effort would become not just a campaign element, but become a serious systemic factor. But definitely, President is sending a very strong signal to the opponents who are accusing him that he is still being a puppet of Kolomoisky. But one can understand that if you really take the list of Forbes of oligarchs in Ukraine, that Zelensky did break with him quite a while ago. And I think Yuri, as a professional historian, may comment on that, even though they were initially connected at the rise of Zelensky to power, they have parted ways a long time since. Again, I would say as long as it's not a campaign effort, as long as it's not one-time deal, but a systemic push, I would appreciate that. But it's a very strong signal, absolutely, especially to those naysayers who continue accusing Zelensky of being spineless and being under command of the oligarchs. And I still think that American side is very interested in either extradition of Kolomoisky or perhaps at real good judicial procedure over his dealings. I would agree here with Alexei, and I know some insider information that indeed Zelensky was a bit concerned with his earlier relations with Kolomoisky, given the very specific financial relations they had before Zelensky was president. One can say that Zelensky was dreaming about ways to create serious problems to Igor Valerievich Kolomoisky. But we'll see, I guess, later if it is just a smoke and mirrors campaign or indeed if they are serious about reviewing his dealings and the corruption that they fostered. We'll see if this oligarch remains free, if they'll be under house arrest, or indeed if he'll be in jail and the proceedings will go as proper and the bolts would be tightened. But definitely, this is a very serious step in our relations with Americans, because they do have certain questions to Kolomoisky. They have a lot of questions to this oligarch during years of Ukrainian independence, and I think this is one of those questions and actions and messages that Biden administration was demanding from Zelensky. Yeah, I think this shows that to answer the question if Zelensky can hear American partners, apparently he can. The next question is how serious will the whole thing be? Because everybody has concerns that it doesn't stay just as a campaign action, that indeed we need a systemic fight with corruption in this country. That would not stop. Here's another news. Nobel Prize Committee decided to continue inviting ambassadors from Russia and from Ukraine to their events. Why is that happening, Alexei? Why do you think they're stepping back from sanctions? One of the elements of culture in the West actively present in the agenda is a very ultra-left agenda. A bunch of different activists and fighters who are eager to spill paint on the painting of 17th century artist just to talk about some ecology. So the activists of the radical kind, a little also related to them is the Western professors groups from different universities who very often are adepts of Marxism, who also play a card of everybody needs to be heard, everybody is right, there is nobody right, both sides are right. And group, classic example of which, by the way, is Roman Pope, also not a professor per se, but the same approach. And these are people who are bringing up the views from Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, Catherine First and Peter the Great, and saying, well, from their point of view, this war is justified. And it's not because they're evil in saying that, but they indeed think that Russia has certain rights and claims in that war. And they cannot claim and cannot call Putin international criminal the way he is and call his regime a fascist regime, even though it is. They just fail to do that because if they do it, they need to then follow with a lot of questions. For example, ask themselves how come this country is the member of United Nations and actually is the member of Security Council of that organization? Why the country is being accepted on the international arena in BRICS and such. So it's too painful to look under these stones, and they'd rather try to pacify them, even in symbolic gestures, and maybe get a Russian and Ukrainian girl walking their dogs together for some social commercial. But we also, so they're trying to agree with Putin about something. You know, the last person who agreed with Putin was Yevgeny Prigozhin. He agreed with Putin. They actually were on a central television shaking hands and saying that they both love Russia and they're fighting the evil West. And it's peace, love, and understanding. So I would advise that Nobel Committee, United Nations, and the rest who want to talk to Putin to communicate with the spirit of Prigozhin. Just get a Ouija board and or something else, whatever you can, and try to talk to him and see what he tells you. He'll tell you a lot about these agreements and photo opportunities with Putin. We need to start calling things the way they are. We went too far in creating illusions for the mass, for people who, without even that effort, are eager to jump for any illusions. And the real task of powers of administrations is to show reality to their people. And the first step is to start calling things their names. According to Confucius tradition, by the way, every meeting of Chinese party is starting with correcting names. They're eager to spend several days before the actual work starts trying to define, make sure they have right definition for the right process. And only then they start discussing. So, unlike that, I'm not supporting Chinese party, but that's an interesting tradition. Unlike that, Europe doesn't want to go into this field. They don't want to look at things and understand that fascism is fascism, that sport in Russia is part of government politics. And let's invite an ambassador. Which ambassador? The one that just told you and sent a note of protest saying that it's not us in Bucha, that we're not sending missiles at Kiev, that's Ukrainian air defense systems shooting at themselves. You want to invite these people to these events? People who kick Europe out of Africa and interfere with everything they can. This is very childish infantilism, and it is showing the tightness of its grasp on their groups of intellectuals in the West. But collective pressure, our protest of Minister of Foreign Affairs, a bunch of public organizations that also pointed finger at that and said, no, don't do that. Uh, it actually does change situation. And even Pope got enough pushback after his last attempt to say, let's call kumbaya in peace. And that's when the story stops. So every time you see such an example of pacifying Putin and his government and trying to downplay his danger to the world, you need to keep shooting and hitting the hands of those who are trying to bring their hands closer to restart, reset button with Russia. First of all, we need to put in jail those criminals who started this war, who are killing people, who are in charge of all these casualties. After that, of course, we can give hand and start negotiating. And Russians are Russians. People are one thing, but regime needs to be done with a maximum sternness. And all these half tones. This is not regime. These are just sportsmen of regime. These are not. This is not regime. This is not Putin's regime. These are just diplomats of that regime. No, these are representatives. These are ambassadors of that regime. These people support totalitarian horror that Putin Russia is, and his ambassadors are direct conduits of Putin's politics, which officially stated that the West is an enemy. What effing Nobel Committee are we talking about, right? We also should, I guess, invited Hitler and his sportsmen to play baseball somewhere in 1943 in the United States, right? Or maybe invite somebody from Japan to Los Alamos where Oppenheimer was building his bomb back in the days of Second World War. So yeah, the committee. There is another piece of news that they revoked that invitation. Right, that's what I'm talking about. The pressure works, and we just need to continue exerting it. All right. Quick note: please do not forget to click the like button. We have a ton of people watching us live, but each additional like brings us 10 more eyeballs. So thank you for supporting. About Confucianism that you mentioned, answering the previous question. China, by the way, published those new maps, right? The new maps where they wrote China over the territory of Russia. And Russia wasn't really upset about it or was not publicly commenting that. And bloggers of Russian descent, the ones who are discussing and addressing these matters, they basically stating that Russia essentially acknowledged their vassal position to China, and they're not even barking back against these encroachments. And yeah, their current position is yeah, China is aspiring to acquire some territory of Russia, but you don't understand. This is different. We have a much larger war on the West. That's the Russian official position. By the way, China also published the same maps. They spilled over some territory of India, Japan, Korea, some other countries, and everywhere in those countries, foreign affairs ministers reacted with the maximum sternness to that incident. While Russia said, don't rush to conclusions, don't be too harsh. Even our favorite drunkard Medvedev, ex-president of Russia, who also is just threatening nukes to the world and the nuclear ashes to the world, but is not saying anything about China. Well, that's a mistake, right? Not a big deal. Maybe the ink spilled. That just shows you how much they are dependent on China and staying ally with them. Not in regards that they even have that much of a trade happening with China, but they do not allow themselves intellectually to even go against them because they understand, I guess, they keep thinking that if they lose China, they lose the last big notable partner. And all these claims about let's attack Poland, let's hit the countries of Baltic region and push back on United States. But oh no, we don't. Nothing to see here. It's just China. Don't look there. And Chinese, they understand, I think, whom they deal with. I think they despise Putin's government, regardless what you think about Chinese current regime and government. They have certain ideals, and they actually are systems, so they can see, and I think they have very certain understanding of what Russia is, and probably very clear understanding when they're using these small steps to show Russia and to show the rest of the world what relations they have with each other. Because Russia is the only country that did not push back. Could you imagine that situation under Soviet Union when China would paint something in the far east of Russia with their paint on the map? I think they would have issues on all sides, on diplomatic, probably military, and other angles as a pushback to that. So here, Russia acknowledges that they don't have enough capacity, and it's also very criminalized. It's on the highest level. It's corrupt through and through to the level of Putin, and basically tells you sit tight at the bottom and always endure whatever the people above you say. You have no rights. You cannot object. And China is above, was on top of Russia for a while, and Russia is just asking which position do you want us to take. All right, one more news I think is interesting. Alexei, you can comment on. United States is planning to supply AMRAAM aviation missiles with a wide range of action that can shoot Russian aviation without, that can allow Ukrainian aviation to shoot Russian targets without getting into the zone of Russian air defense systems. So these missiles are part of NASAMS systems that defend Kiev and other cities. And what is known that we're getting the last modification, C7, and the D, the one that flies furthest up to 180 kilometers. That's one of the most expensive and latest generation. So these will be attached to F-16s, right? Right. They're covering a very specific niche. We talked about them, but let's talk again. Russian Su-35s that are based alongside the front line and the ones that are based in Crimea, their radar can see twice further than our Ukrainian radars. And they can hit our jets at a distance of 120 kilometers. They can lock the target and shoot the missile at it. So F-16 got a rather good radar, but it's not as advanced as Russian Su-35. Even with this radar, it was not on par with Su-35. So our MiG-29s, Su-27s, they were in a very difficult position. The pilots on these jets are always hanging by a thread whenever they're performing tasks on the southern front. They're really risking their lives because you don't even see the enemy that can shoot you down at 100 kilometers. So what Americans did to solve it? I think it is definitely a military genius. So F-16s, they can shoot these missiles in general direction where they know Russian interceptors, Russian fighters are. And then this missile goes to the sky and is looking for a target there. So it's enough from the intel systems of higher level. Whenever we get information from satellite and other means, we get this information, related information, to our jet pilots, and they can just launch their missile in direction of where Russian airplanes were sighted. And all it needs, the missile goes there and then looks for a target in the area at that time, an air-to-air missile. And that changes the situation on the battlefront. Wherever F-16s equipped with these missiles, it does change the situation, and this one is a game-changing situation. At least equalize a situation that a weapon that will equalize our forces with Russian Federation, because for the last 18 months, all our jets were at the very least subpar compared to Russians. So basically, our pilots could see 90 kilometers far and could shoot up to 40 kilometers. Russians could see 200 kilometers around them and could shoot up to 120. So we were actually quite blind in comparison with them. And regardless, our pilots still managed to fulfill a lot of missions, a lot of successful missions on the front. So now one of the serious advantages that Russian Federation has, such as Su-35s, with their munition detection and enemy detection systems and radar systems, now even that advantage is starting to dwindle. And we're getting to being roughly on par with them, which again indicates that our military is becoming one of the most technologically advanced militaries in Europe, and we are capable of fighting Russia in air as well. F-16 is a very complex platform, basically. The difficulty of using this jet is not in just learning how to fly it, but the fact that you would have a big group. For example, you have a dozen of them up, some of them providing air defense, some of them destroying ground-based radar systems, and a bunch of them would be used against the troops on the ground. So this is a more complex use, and for that you need to train and learn how to do that. This is a very serious factor. And I think it deserved my 7-minute speech to explain it. And one more news in the development of complex capabilities of Ukraine to hit Russian military targets is the statement made by Danilov, the Secretary of Ukraine Services, Enforcement Services, Special Services, and that Ukraine is developing missiles that will be able to shoot targets up to 700 kilometers deep in Russia. And a lot of specialists were working on that project so that Ukraine would get a capacity to shoot Russian military objects that are deep in the territory of Russia. So before that, Ukraine used Neptunes. They had modernized Neptunes that can shoot not only they can be shot not only at warships but also at land targets. And I think this is an announcement of autumn-winter agenda from Ukraine, because Russia is preparing their own surprises, Shaheds and the others, and Ukraine is continuing to show that despite of our problems, we still are developing. And whenever we overcome the issues of spending unnecessary funds on beautification of the cities or maintenance of things that don't need that maintenance, I think we are starting to divert the resources in the right direction. And we can see that good projects, provided enough resources, they allow us to produce significant game-changing weapons. So here's an example. Islamic Jihad in sector Gaza is producing 15,000 Qassam missiles that wreak quite a bit of problems for Israel, where people have to spend some time in shelter because of these terrorists. And despite all the technological advantages of Israel, they still have to face that threat and they have to somehow deal with it. We are not Hamas, we're not Israel, we're bigger. We have more resources in general. And it just shows that whenever we get our heads together and money right, we can come with brilliant solutions. And we knew that back in 2014, that if we had 20 complexes of Grom type, their operative tactical complex with a radius of 1,000, 1,500 kilometers, they would put a big question mark at the probability of invasion as such, because having 10 systems of this kind with the Ukraine military changes everything on the battlefront. It makes vulnerable everything, their aviation, their logistics, their command posts, much deeper in the territory of Russia. Basically, most of their European territory to Urals, where it's mostly concentrated. And if you have 20 of these, then it's a question do even contemplate invasion. And the only thing that we did not manufacture these in time, and this is a definite strike on us as people of Ukraine and all of the previous general commanders of Ukraine, because we, as a nation, failed to manufacture these, and under pressure of European and American allies, we also did not keep any of the Elbrus systems. Some of them were transferred to Russia back in the 90s. So finally, I guess on the 18th months of war, we finally were pushed enough to the brink to produce some of these missiles. So I would say that if we get a capability to launch 10 of these missiles on Russian targets a month, the cost of this war for Russia will start growing so tremendously that they'll have to review their whole military politics, including what to do with military production that is located in the European part of the country, with their airfields where they keep a lot of jets and bombers. They have to change and relocate a lot of troops to different parts of the country. And it's not just tens of billions of dollars, it's also actual logistics. Because they will be facing a reality where not a single airfield up to Ural Mountains can remain unpunishable. And then the next question, what happens if we get 50 missiles a month capability? Then Russian problems becomes much drastic. And their territory is huge. They don't have enough air defense systems to cover that. They have a ton more objects in need of cover than they have those systems. And that means, hello, Ukrainian missiles. And I do hope that then this trend will continue going. And it's understandable that they will not remain unpunished after destroying our infrastructure. And I think they will eat it with a full spoon. And if they are dumb enough to continue into the next spring and summer, then it's a big question who will be getting more UAVs and other things on their heads. Because that game can be played by both sides. And by the way, hello, people in Kremlin, you can actually lose that game. Because there will come time when we actually will be able to send more in your direction. And we also have partners, it's not just us. And Russian economy is what, 1.5% of global GDP? At least if you're looking at the military budgets. So hello there, guys, get ready. This winter will be interesting for you, not only for us. Super, I like it. You know, we have one more strange news from Hamburg, from Germany, where some Russian citizen was attacked who was a Russian citizen attacked Ukrainian kids who were just speaking Ukrainian. He attacked them in the street, and as an attempted murder, Germany is prosecuting that as an attempted murder, and I think this is politics of inaction that Germany was guilty of for a long time that allowed to these situations even exist, that these aggressive Russians are even present at their territory. I don't think it's exactly inactivity. I think they're not taking the threat seriously. They basically transferring Russian rational model onto Western rational model onto the territory of Russian Federation. Because for the Western mind, it seems unreasonable to take a 10-year-old kid, and throw him from an overpass on the concrete below, or to attack a Ukrainian girl in the street. Remember, a year ago, there was a question about denying visas to Russian citizens to Europe. And they ran out of arguments at that point. Here's an argument. What is good here is that German prosecution qualified this crime as politically motivated attack. I think it's the first time, not like didn't qualify it as a hooligan or as a madman, this politically motivated attack. If it will be qualified like this, these are very different terms of jail, and also different terms of visa regimes allowed for citizens of such countries who display that behavior. So that finally shows that Germans are also probably slow walking a lot of things, but eventually when they start running, they start running. This is a very serious step. I don't remember a single step before that to be qualified as political. They tried to use all kinds of their criminal code against events that they happened before, but now they're finally starting to call it what it is. But we'll have to see what happens later. Who will be an attorney? Who will be fighting for that criminal? Who will be saying that it is not so black and white? But an appearance of such a qualification is means a lot. It starts to show that Europeans finally start to understand whom are they dealing with and what are Putin people, citizens who are living under propaganda 24/7, what they can do. And they think that it's only in Russia. No, there's a ton of Russian citizens who live in Europe, in Germany, in Britain, in the United States, who've been living there for 20, 30 years, and they still are vehemently pro-Putin and his tyrannical fascist government. So it's a question. They need to start doing something about these people. All right, colleagues, we've been live for about 50 minutes. I think we covered everything we wanted today. There was also an article on foreign affairs, which touched about a lot of things that Russia is trying to globalize this war. But I think these are bigger questions that we did talk about them before. We'll continue talking in our big discussions later. So maybe for today, our first traveling stream will be to call it over. Thank you, Alexei. Thank you, Yuri. Everybody who watched us today, do not forget to click like and subscribe. And if you have not subscribed to Privateer Station, do that as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. See you. And have a good mood. And congratulations to Odessa with the Day of the City. And Sumy, by the way. Sumy as well. Yep. There are two hero cities in Ukraine. Thank you, guys.